Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the issue of human migration. Now, human migration and mobility is an age-old phenomena touching almost every society around the world. However, things have changed over time in various ways. Examining the shifts in scale, direction, demography and frequency can help us further understand how migration is evolving and can also lead to effective policies, programs and operational responses on the ground. A broad range of factors continue to determine the movement of people. They're either voluntary or forced movements as a result of the increased magnitude and frequency of disasters, economic challenges, and extreme poverty or conflict situations. Approximately 281 million people were international migrants in the year 2020, representing 3.6% of the global population. Now, the theme for this year's International Migrants Day is harnessing the potential of human mobility. In fact, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development recognizes for the first time the contribution of migration to sustainable development. 11 out of 17 SDGs contain targets and indicators relevant to migration or mobility. In today's episode, we will discuss and analyze various factors contributing to migration and its impact as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have with us in the studio Professor V. Rajyalakshmi, a well-known sociologist from the University of Delhi. Welcome, ma'am, to our studios. We're also joined by Mr. Rajiv Kher, a distinguished fellow at RIS. Professor Cecil Foster is joining us from the Department of Transnational Studies at the University of Buffalo in New York. And we're also joined by Mr. Shyam K.G. Parande, nominated expert at India Center for Migration in the Ministry of External Affairs. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, as well to Sansad TV. Let me begin the show and let me begin with you, Mr. Kher. Let's first start by understanding holistically the concept of migration and where do we stand in today's world vis-a-vis the process of migration, various factors which are causing this to happen.
I can give you a sense of a generalist perception of migration because a more sociological or political perspective can perhaps be given by the professors present here. From an economic perspective, migration is seen over the last several years because of the change in the paradigm of production processes, services, the way they are rendered, and the fact that there are demand opportunities arising in different economic jurisdictions. And therefore, people from one part of the world tend to move to other part of the world in search of job. There is a complementarity, and this complementarity is what drives the process of migration. So seen from an economic perspective, I would say we have seen a lot of it over the last several years, particularly since the 80s.
Okay.
Because a new paradigm of production processes, the whole differentiation of wage structure and skill sets evolution has facilitated this process.
Okay. Professor Rajyalakshmi, let me bring you in here. And then, when we're talking about the factors responsible for the process of migration, there are various push factors, pull factors, the drivers, socio-economic, socio-political as well, the situation, the conflict situations. And recently, new paradigm has been added, the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. See, if we have to understand migration, it is very important for us to understand that migration has an impact and a cause differently for different sectors. First of all, India, I'll just give the example of India. We have a huge informal sector. So formal sector has a different reasons and informal sector has a different reasons and impact. Secondly, it's always push and pull factors. Push factors could be both because of the internal reasons, which could be economic reasons, it could be social reasons as well, and it could be because of the lack of overall development of a particular place. For example, we have always seen in India from the beginning that there has always been a migration from rural to urban areas. Why? Mainly because agriculture. I'll just give an example of agriculture. In India, though we claim that India is an agricultural country, unfortunately, the policies and the programs which are meant for the farmers is not that adequate that it can take care of their needs.
Okay.
And they are totally dependent on natural, calamities or natural environment. For that, it becomes very difficult for them to sustain themselves. So a lot of times what happens is that they are seasonal migrants. That is the people who do not have land, and even if those who have land, what they do is they always try to look for jobs in the cities. I'll talk about the informal, agriculture workers who, because of this agricultural uncertainties, where they are not employed 365 days, tend to move out of those villages to the cities.
Okay.
And they come to the cities. Now what happens is cities, nearby cities or far off cities, they have, of course, opportunities for giving them, providing with livelihood. Now once they come here, then it becomes very difficult for most of them to go back, because they see that there is a continuous flow of cash or money for that matter. And that becomes a very difficult for the host cities. So this kind of a problem of push and pull factors is a very huge and a complex one, which needs to be understood at different levels, different sectors, since India is very, very heterogeneous. I'm only giving the example of India.
Okay.
Of course, outside India, we have different reasons again for it. That is a lot of Indians, because of, unfortunately, which huge population that, India is not able to cater to the needs of this population. A lot of people for different reasons migrate to other countries as well.
Okay.
So,
okay.
yeah, that's it.
And that's also termed most of the times as looking for greener pastures outside when we're talking about employment opportunities or other aspects as well. Therein, I'd like to bring in Mr. Parande. Mr. Parande, when we're talking about the external migration, or as Professor Rajya Lakshmi was referring to our own country's example, since you're associated with the MEA's organization vis-a-vis the migration part, where do we stand, and what are various factors affecting that part of the migration there?
Well, we are the largest migrating country, as a matter of fact, and in search of jobs and opportunities both. We have been supplying labor in many countries, as well as the skilled labor and high skilled labor also. And this has been happening to all the countries across the world. 2 years back, the number was something like 193 countries that we have migrated to. This provides an opportunity, and as a matter of fact, Indian diaspora outside India is supposed to be the most vibrant. Wherever they go, they contribute to the local communities, economies in many ways, and also repatriate the funds. So it's both ways. It's gain for India as well as it's gain for the local country. They contribute to the local country and their country of their origin.
Okay.
And this has been happening for long. And we can say that 2 years back, of course, the COVID period had slowed down the movement as well as the money coming in.
Okay.
However, this has been a remarkable, a considerable contribution to our GDP also.
Okay, that's a very important aspect you brought in, Mr. Parande, and I'd like to take it to both Professor Rajya Lakshmi and Mr. Kher as well. But before I do that, let me bring in Professor Cecil Foster. Let's also understand that the global situation there. Professor Foster, if we have to, look at the global scenario vis-a-vis the process of migration, approximately 3.6% of global population is in movement at one point in time or the other, if you look at the 2020 figures.
A very interesting question you're asking, and one of the ways that I like to look at this issue is that if 3.6% of the world's population is in movement at this time as we speak, it means that something like 96% isn't. And I think that that is often lost, and that we tend to think that everyone around the world wants to get up and move somewhere else, whereas studies over the years have found that people do not, in general, like to migrate. People like to live, raise their kids, die, be buried, or how their bodies are returned in the land that they know and where their culture and their horizons are. So when we are looking at 3.6% of the world population, very often we are looking at a few people, relatively speaking.
Okay.
And immigration in that sense then is often governed by a class and a race component, where if we look at the high end, those who are moneyed and usually out of Western Europe, considered to be economically rich and sociologically white, it becomes easy for them to move and for them to be accepted into other societies that are predominantly white. If they are poor and if they are racialized as non-white, then it becomes a big question as to whether or not they can get into many of these countries. So as a result, it becomes very difficult to have one specific paradigm, in my view, that really explains what is happening in terms of migration or immigration. And yes, while the economic factors are there, the racial and the ethnic factors are equally important as well.
Okay. That's also a very interesting way of looking at things. Mr. Kher, would you agree with that stipulation, as Professor Foster is pointing out, that let's also look at the other side of the story, and that shows that not a majority of the population and a significant majority of the global population is in migration at any given point in time. But when we have to focus on that 3.6% and the factors responsible there as well, as Professor Raju Lakshmi is pointing out, the idea here or the need here is to understand in a much better way the factors which are responsible, so that those challenges which are posed by that migration can be addressed in a better way.
I think the answer lies in both the statements made by Professor Foster and Professor Raju Lakshmi. The genesis of migration, well, I appreciate the point that Professor Foster made in terms of the numbers, in terms of the percentages. And I accept that given the choice, if somebody is comfortable in a given scenario, he or she would not like to move out. Of course, for a small outing on a travel or sort of a holiday and so on. But generally, people would not like to leave their well-evolved, well-preserved cocoons where they stay. But since that is not the real situation, the real situation is driven by the push and pull factors that Professor Raju Lakshmi had earlier mentioned. I think it is intrinsic that migration is bound to increase over time. Of course, there will be factors which will play upon pushing down the progress of migration. And we have seen that happening, particularly, again, coming back to my economic context, where we saw in the last few years when we had a sort of an anti-globalization wave, which has been blowing all over, and the economic nationalism which has evolved, we have seen that there has been a certain amount of resistance to accepting people in economic areas from different countries.
Okay.
And to that extent, I think the movement of people will get affected as we evolve in this sort of a paradigm.
Okay.
So I think the answer lies in both the statements made, but we need to qualify that this process will continue to evolve the manner in which it has, albeit nuanced by the fact that economic scenario, global scenario will keep changing as we go along.
Okay. That's obviously pretty much an accepted fact now, that this situation, that is situation which is the migration process, will continue to evolve the way it has over the years or over the decades we've seen. But Professor Raju Lakshmi, I'll take back to what Mr. Parande was referring to. And there is a positive aspect to that as well. For example, along with the fact that we have the highest migration numbers when we're talking about the external migration, that is migration to other countries, we have also made a lot of contribution. The Indian diaspora has made a lot of contribution in those places where they have gone and settled, one. And two, the remittances, in terms of remittances, economically speaking, also, we have the highest number of remittances, if I'm not wrong.
See, one thing is that it's absolutely correct that, for the host country, of course, it has been very good because Indians have a lot of talent and they have been able to prosper or contribute a lot to the host country wherever they have migrated to. But I would definitely agree with what Professor Foster also said, is that it can lead to a lot of negative impact as well.
Okay.
For economic aspect, yes. But when it comes to the social and the cultural aspect, then it can have a negative, because it all depends how much the host country is able to incorporate. Why? Mainly because there's always a feeling of us and them. And that is one of the reasons why we see that when people tend to migrate to a different country or to a different city, and they try to form their own ghettos, their own communities, and then start developing their own cultural practices and the social practices, and they tend to stick together so that they can all be united. So the feeling of us and them always arises when there is a migration.
Okay.
Of course, positive aspect has been there, that is India has been able to gain a lot of in terms of money inflow. There has a lot of been NRI population which continuously keeps coming, pumping money to the Indian economy. That is there, of course, but as far as the social aspect is concerned, we need to look at it, because many a times what happens is in many countries, the host countries does not accept you so easily, and you're always as a second-class citizen. So the confidence level of interaction, the confidence level of contributing also affects. As Professor Foster very clearly said, that we need to look at in terms of different classes and different races. Classes, of course, upper class, that is those who are have plenty and then contribute both in terms of brain, plenty of brain in the sense that, those who have really been able to do educationally well, their contribution can, of course, be appreciated a lot by the host countries. But unfortunately, the unskilled labor, which is, taken, or semi-skilled labor, it is them that we need to really look at.
Okay. So
That's
the social aspect of it and social
very
factors
important.
is something which will have to be focused upon
yes.
there. Mr. Parande, in terms of policy interventions, now that we are looking at all these aspects where specifically we're talking about what needs to be done to deal with these factors. So when we have to understand what more can be done with the policy intervention, we know the factors, the push and pull factors, we know the challenges as well. Now, based on our understanding of those factors, we will have to evolve processes and policies or tweak the existing ones. How do we do that?
Well, the center I'm part of, India Center for Migration, is trying to work out that unless and until we find out where are the opportunities and matching skills that we'll have to have if we are really serious about India's migration rate. And it's a reality that we cannot provide jobs to all the people that, considering the size of the population that we have. We'll always be looking out of this country for people to migrate, earn, and settle. And that's what, of course, there are problems with migration, because we have open society. It's pushed by the society itself. People push out themselves, reach out to the unknown shores, try to struggle over there. However, the ICM will have a role in finding out the ways to train them, to orient them before they migrate to whichever country they are, and considering the local situations and culture.
Okay.
And the society itself. Everybody will have to get a little bit of orientation, and so that they smoothly work over there in those societies.
Okay.
So that has to be monitored by governments and state government has a role because employment is under state government in India. So central government together with state government will have to play a role, active role, proactive role rather, in training them, orienting them if we wish to send them out for employment. Secondly, the other part, what Professor Rajalakshmi ji said, you see, Indians have succeeded, of course, keeping behind the earlier experiences like in Kenya or Uganda or where there were disturbances. It's settling down now, and because Indian businessmen, though in a small number, are generating a lot of jobs, local jobs, contributing to the local economy, as well as serving them beyond providing jobs. Like Indian organizations, Indian diaspora organizations in those countries, during the COVID, contributed a lot, served a lot by getting oxygen concentrators or providing free services, whatever, food even, food kits. And this served. So these are the ways that where we, as a matter of fact, also another major factor, we are used to the living with diversity.
Indeed, there is there's no doubt about the contribution made by Indian diaspora, and that is pretty much evident and documented as well. Professor Foster, I'd like to bring you in here. You spoke about the social aspects vis-a-vis migration. In terms of policy interventions at a global level, what are your views? What needs to be done? We've understood the factors clearly now. Of course, they will keep on evolving, and so we will have to keep on evolving our policies as well.
Yes, and I am one who argues that we need to have more fluidity in the immigration and immigration policies that allow for easier going and coming, and that we need to move away from the old paradigms where we thought of migration and immigration as primarily refugee of some sorts, whether you are economic refugee, where you're going looking for a job or to do better than where you are, or whether you are a political refugee, where because of the push that is happening in your homeland, you cannot exist and you need to flee so that you can live elsewhere. But at the same time, there are other things, and some of our panelists have mentioned earlier, the good things about immigration that comes with the fluidity. When I think, for example, of my own situation as someone originally from the Caribbean and from the West Indies, and a descendant of Africans, and who, with people from primarily India, developed the communities that are the Caribbean communities. And then someone like me then leaving the Caribbean and going first to Canada and now to Buffalo, New York. But when I go to the North American societies, I see the very rich multicultural society. I go through Toronto, and I see parts of Toronto where, for all intents and purposes, the signage could easily make me think that I am in Southeast Asia, in parts of India. Mm-hmm. And it's also the case too when I go to a place like Burnaby and Vancouver and places like that. And to me, those are the good things about immigration. Where we view immigration not only as the host country or the receiving country giving, but as immigration that improves the home country. That the kind of lifestyle and the kinds of policies that we see in a multicultural Canada, where you might have noticed in the last federal election, someone of Indian background was the leader of one of the major parties and had a chance of becoming prime minister of the country. Those are the good things, and those are the kinds of fluidities, the kind of transnational life that I'm talking about.
Okay.
where
Okay.
someone-
So what you're pointing out, Professor Foster, here is that more inclusive policies, the example some which you mentioned out there is required in terms of, dealing with the situation of migration, making it more smooth there as well. Thank you so much, Professor Foster and Mr. Khare, Mr. Parande, and Professor Rajulakshmi as well for sharing your views and insight. As our experts were pointing out, there are various factors responsible for migration, and most prominent amongst them are, of course, socio-political, economical, and environmental as well. The conflict situations adding more to it, but we have to also understand how to ensure that this process of migration is beneficial to both the host country as well as to those people who are coming as migrants there. And therein comes the need for having more inclusive policy vis-a-vis migration, something which our experts are referring to. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments here and come back again on Monday with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.